Welcome to Agatha Christie She Watched, our spoiler-heavy look at the movie and TV adaptations of the mystery genre's greatest writer. I'm Bill Peschel of Peschel Press, publishers of the annotated novels of Agatha Christie, and today we're talking about boar hunts, boring brothers, cough mixtures, and sex, and more sex. It's Petits, meurtres en famille, the 2006 French television adaptation of Hercule Poirot's Christmas, and what were the other titles?
A Holiday for Murder, or Murder for Christmas.
But first, let me introduce my partner in marriage as well as crime of the fictional kind, Teresa Peschel. Hello, Teresa.
Hi, Bill. It's always a pleasure to be here with you underneath the stairs, and we have a little special guest today. Sasha is in the office here with us, but I don't expect her to contribute in any way. But if you do hear an odd squeak in the background, that's probably Sasha.
She's here to observe, perched on her little chair.
And do what cats do best, which is watch other people work.
That's right. And here we're going to talk about, the titles are kind of weird because on DVD form as Agatha Christie's Family Murder Party. But this is still Hercule Poirot's Christmas, except that it takes place at a French chateau and it has very strong French elements. This is a long one as well. This is over 6 hours.
Yeah, it's 4 separate episodes, each about 95 minutes long. They have plenty of time to give all the backstory you could possibly want for any character who has more than 3 lines, and yet at the same time, and this is probably my only quibble with the episode, they didn't finish up with Inez's story, even though they obviously had the time to see endless scenes of Alix riding her horse, but they didn't tell you what happened with Inez and Eloi, and I am going to mangle the French names.
But of course, as usual, we're going to go through and do the English equivalents as well. So we're calling our head of the family Simon Lee. Right?
Yes, absolutely. And in this case, it was clear enough who was who, so I can stick with the French names. 6.5 hours, and I know what the French names are, even if I'm not going to pronounce them correctly.
Well, I just realized we don't have the family name.
Letisco? But they're the Lee family. They're the Lee family.
We'll call it the Lee family, but other than that, and the head of the family is Simon, so
yes.
They kept that.
As Bill mentioned, this is Hercule Poirot's Christmas, or A Holiday for Murder, or Murder for Christmas, whatever title you have on your paperback on your shelf. It is surprisingly faithful to the novel, except for the point of course, removing Hercule Poirot entirely. And instead, you have Superintendent Larosiere, I'm never sure how to say his name.
Yeah,
Larosiere. And his eager young boy assistant, Emile Lampion. For those of you who are watching season 1 of The Little Murders, even though you see Larosiere and Lampion, this is not in the same universe. This is a parallel universe several steps over in another direction because this takes place later. It is not the mid-1930s. This is February of 1939, and they give you a specific date when Pope Pius the 11th. Pope Pius the 11th dies during the events, and the maids talk about it. You also know that Victor Lee, he's the Harry Lee's closest partner in the original novel, he is training for the 1940 Olympics. So this all takes place at the end of January, the beginning of February of 1939. They are very specific, but when you watch season 1 of The Little Murders, that's actually about 1935, 1936. And that's when Lampion and Larosiere first meet. Well, here they first meet in 1939, and there's an absolutely critical point at the end, if you know the story. And should I do the spoiler now?
This is one of those cases where I would equate it at the same level as Roger Ackroyd and Orient Express. Once you know this, it will affect how you see it in the future. So if you haven't read Hercule Poirot's Christmas, if you haven't seen this yet but are interested in it and don't want to know the shattering climax, the solution to the mystery.
Because you cannot watch this the second time without remembering what happened.
That's correct. So if you don't want to know who done it, turn it off because we're going to be discussing this all the way through. And this is a spoiler-heavy podcast, but you knew that going in, didn't you?
Well, we hope so.
Well, after all that, then if you like, we could also back up for a moment, though, and establish something first, that this is a miniseries from 2006. It predates La Petite Meurtres Agatha Christie, the Little Murders of Agatha Christie series.
And it was so well received that they decided to do more with the detective pair, Lampion and Larosiere. But obviously, because of how this ends, they had to move over to a different universe and move forward in time, even though the location is still approximately the same. They're somewhere up in northern France along
the coastline near Belgium. I think there's a province, Nord province, which is where all these seasons take place.
I guess in France, it's probably, where those northern bumpkins come from, kind of like Minnesota or North Dakota, because this certainly isn't the bright lights and
big city
and cosmopolitan Paris. It is not cosmopolitan. It is not sophisticated. You are out there in the back of beyond, and everybody is cold.
Right. You're not in the south of France. You're not in Provence or on the Riviera. You're not in Brittany, which considers itself not a part of France.
France is actually considerably larger than you would think. The only thing you know about France is what you see in movies, and all you see is Paris and the Eiffel Tower. France, like most countries, is considerably more varied than you would think. So we're in the far northern reaches of France, about as far north as you can go before you hit the water, and then there's Denmark and Scandinavia on the other side. I guess for a French audience, there are probably hidden jokes that you can snicker at those northern rubes, but we didn't see what they were. Right. One thing I will say about the chateau is, even though it was a gorgeous, huge castle, I mean, it was a frickin' castle, it was absolutely immense, and it could have held far more people than it did, they didn't really look rich. I mean, they had money. That was clear enough. They had wealth. And yet at the same time, you don't get the impression like with Dynasty, where everything has been gold plated, and what hasn't been gold plated has been lined with diamonds. It just doesn't give you that sensation. The other thing that they do really well, and I've now sat through almost 200 of these adaptations and set in English country houses, Le Chateau has servants. You can see the people who actually run this place. There must be at least 12 people, maybe more, because some of the servants we only see in the background, and they only get like one line. There is Mr. Paul, the butler, Marco, who is Simon Lee's valet. I do not know if Marco the valet is also Edward's valet. Probably not, which means we never see Edward's valet, just like we never see Edith's lady's maid, but I guarantee you they had them. Then you have the head housekeeper, Louise. She is having an affair with Antonine, who is the closest parallel to George Lee. You have 4 maids. There are at least 4 maids in black uniforms drifting around in the background. They are carrying things, they are cleaning things, they are opening drapes, they are closing drapes, they are fluffing blankets. You see them actually working in the background.
It's actually useful to see that they were in the background during stressful moments, because there's a scene where one of the sons drags his tart of a mistress down the hall. There's a fiancée, actually, not a mistress, down the hall. They're going to have strong words, and you could see a maid in the background bringing towels upstairs to some part of the castle, and not turning around, being perfectly deaf to the screaming match that's going on behind her down the hall.
But you know she's listening, and in fact, on occasion, you see things that say the servants all know. We have seen some Christie adaptations set both in the 30s and in the 50s in castles, and you have one servant, and that would be the butler. No, you cannot run a huge building like this without a staff. Hotels don't do it. Nobody can. So you've got the 4 maids drifting around. Then you move downstairs into the kitchen, and you have Madame Dupree, who is the cook. I should say she is the chef, and she has 4 kitchen maids of her very own. And then we move outside Le Chateau. And there is Richard, who is Mr. Paul's son, and he's a general dog's body doing whatever needs to be done. There's at least one gardener. You see him on the ladder up against the wall of the chateau, peeking into what look like pigeon boxes on the side of the building. I don't know why he's doing it. We never get an answer. You know that there is at least one groom that you see dealing with Alix and Edward and Edith as they ride, bringing horses in and out. There also appears to be a gamekeeper because he's the one in charge of the dogs. And he comes and tells Edward that the boar has gone wild. There's a boar in the woods that has gone wild and has ripped out Alix's dog's abdomen. So yes, there is dog death in here. And then off screen, the boar comes back and slaughters 4 more of the dogs, which I did not know that wild boars would do, but okay.
The dogs would probably be barking at the boar, and the boar would be enraged enough to charge.
Yes, but the boar is smart enough to go in to where the dogs are kept, where the kennels are.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess the dogs were loose. So you have this huge staff, and these are just the people that I'm counting. There were probably another gardener and another stable hand. You have a scene where you see the servants sitting down for their dinner before they serve the family's dinner. And there are 12 people around that table, maybe 14. I would have to go back and count what's on the DVD. This is the first time I have seen a script that acknowledges that servants are needed. You need a lot of them, and they watch everything going on. In the servants' hall, they are talking about what the family does, how they are behaving. Oh, that mistress of his. They all have a low opinion of Antonine's cookie that he brought from the city. This is the blonde hottie in scarlet. Obviously, she paints her toenails and fingernails scarlet to go with her blood-red lips.
Oh, she had white toenails.
She had white toenails?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, when she was with the handyman, I pay attention to
and
details like that.
And he was a very handy man, too.
He was a very handy man as well. Over the 6 hours, we got to know the below-stairs staff really well. I could identify even the housemaids who didn't have
much of a speaking part
just because we got to see them so much. Most of this story, maybe 95%, takes place in the castle or on the grounds. Maybe some at the police station.
Yeah, some at the police station.
Some in the city nearby, but that's it.
Well, I wouldn't say 95, but I would say 90% of this story takes place entirely in the chateau. It was really a fascinating viewpoint, and it's a reminder that the servants know everything. No matter how private you think you are being, if you have a maid in the background dusting and washing the glass and cleaning the light fixtures or setting the fires or making the beds, they're listening. They're watching. They know damn well what you, the family, are doing.
Okay, so among them, the people with significant roles is Paul the butler.
Mr. Paul the butler.
And his son,
Richard, who is
out of jail for thievery, and he's going to be a suspect.
And you have Louise, the head housekeeper. You can tell she's the head housekeeper because she is allowed to wear civilian clothes. She is the only one of the servants, of the maids in the house, who is not wearing either a parlor maid's uniform, which is black with the white collar, cuffs, and apron, or a kitchen maid's uniform, which is the blue with the apron and the sleeve protectors. She is the only woman staffer who is not dressed like that.
I think those are the 3 main ones. Oh, and the Dupree, Madame Dupree.
Madame Dupree, the chef,
cook.
Because she is a chef.
She is a chef, you're correct.
She is a chef. She recognizes something critical early on.
Well, let's go into the organization of the family itself.
Oh, yes,
we'll go into the organization of Simon Lee's family. So as we talk about these people, everyone can follow along.
Okay, so you have Simon Lee.
Who is a widower.
He is a widower. He is 70 years old. There is question as to how his wife died. They found her on the ground.
Obviously fell from the window.
Yes, there's the window high above. There she is on the ground. And you have 3 choices. Did she fall? Did she jump? Or was she pushed? And there is dissension as to which it is, because falling is an accident. Jumping is suicide. Being pushed is murder.
Right. So we have also in the family Simon's sister.
Yes, that is Albertine. She does not have an equivalent in Hercule Poirot's Christmas.
And she plays kind of a small role in this. She comes in late, and she has her supernatural abilities that help provide clues.
Yes, she's got this weird setup with a table and an upside-down shot glass and a set of alphabet cards. It's kind of like a do-it-yourself
Ouija board.
I was thinking of planchette myself.
Right.
Well, no, they use a planchette on a Ouija board, don't they?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the thing that you move around. And same thing, only here it's just a glass that you put your finger on and it goes to
supposedly the spirits are going to move
letters.
it around. And here they do. The glass moves on its own.
In fact, at one point it moves without anybody putting their fingers on it.
Yes. So clearly there is a slight supernatural element here. But the world is stranger than we know. So there's Albertine. She doesn't show up until after Simon is murdered.
Then there are the sons. Edward is the corollary to Albert in the novel, and he is married to Edith. Edward is the oldest son. He is the one who is trying to run the company. He is the one who has to put up with his vicious, nasty piece of work of a father. He does not blame his father for his mother's death, or if he does, they never say anything. So you have to assume that he does not blame Simon for his mother's death. Edward is married to Edith. She is younger. It turns out they got married when she was young, 17, and she had a baby right away, and that would be Alex. There were no children in the Lee family in the novel, but here you actually have Alex. A daughter.
Alex the daughter. Then you have Antonin. He is the George equivalent. He is a widower, and he has a fiancée, Magdalene, and she is, again, an equivalent for the fiancée in the novel, flighty, a songstress, a celebrity.
A blonde bombshell who favors strapless dresses. Tight strapless dresses, I might add.
Yes, very tight strapless dresses in dramatic colors. And when you see her next to Edith, who is tasteful, she's tasteful in a different way.
She's tasty than tasteful.
She looks tasty. She is making the most of her assets because she knows she's not getting any younger.
And we have to remind you that Antonin was having an affair with Louise.
Louise, the housekeeper. And apparently this has gone on for years.
But they've been off for a while.
Yeah, they'd been off for a while, but they were on and off for 10 years. And by the way, all the other servants know. Everyone knows that he's been having the affair with Louise. Then you have Victor. Victor is the youngest son. He is the Harry Lee equivalent. David, by the way, the son number 4 was eliminated. So you have Victor. He is the youngest son. He is the most resentful of their father and what happened to their mother. He is absolutely convinced that Simon shoved his wife out the window and refuses to admit that he murdered his wife in cold blood because he's a vicious bastard.
Victor also recalls he was a boy when he was outside, coming across his mother's body and looking up at the window and seeing Simon look down with this strange look on his face and obviously not doing anything to help or react or anything like that. And that's on that basis he thinks that he did it. And he's trying to find out. And this is where he is asking Louise, the housekeeper, throughout for her memories of this, and she's resisting.
Well, he's also actually, he wasn't asking Louise that much. He was asking Madame Dupree, the chef. He's asking Madame Dupree, the chef, because she's been there. She's a woman.
50 years.
50 years. If she started out at age 12, which is when girls would go into service, she is 62 years old, and she has been there her entire life. And she may or may not have had children because they call her Madam. But it is perfectly possible that that is a courtesy title. We don't know. But she has been there for 50 years. Probably started as a scullery maid and worked her way up to chef. And she runs that kitchen, and she knows everything about what has gone on in that household because she's always been there and she hears everything.
Right.
And she will not talk about what happened to Mrs. Lee. She won't talk about all kinds of things, but she hints a little bit here and there. She also has a bad cough, and so she's always drinking her cough syrup. And there's a problem with where the rat poison is stored, and it ends up in the same cabinet as her cough syrup, which is laced with rum, by the way. And the rum probably does more for her cough than the cough syrup does.
So we have Chekhov's rat poison, because you see it side by side with the medicine, and of course you know what's going to be happening.
Oh yeah, you always know, and of course it does. So continuing on with the story, with the characters, you also have Inez. Now she is the Pilar character in Hercule Poirot's Christmas. This time they greatly expanded her story. If you're familiar with the novel, you know that Pilar is actually, that is not her real name. She is a young Spanish woman who has assumed the character of Simon Lee's granddaughter, the only grandchild he has, through his estranged daughter who had married a Spaniard and left because she couldn't stand him. And that is still true here.
It's in the first episode.
Yeah, it's in the very first episode that there is Inez and Victoria. Victoria is their friends, but Victoria is the servant, no question. She is the one who makes arrangements. She's the one who unloads. She's the one who comforts. She's the one who gets the coat. She is Inez's servant. And they have a driver, Diego. And one of the things I thought was interesting about this is they spent some time, not just with real Inez, fake Inez, and Diego the driver, but you get more of an idea of why real Inez accepted the invitation from Simon Lee to come to the French chateau. And that is, her mother is dead. Her father is dead. The Spanish Civil War has been settled. Diego the driver is a Republican, which means that he is a communist and a priest hater and slaughterer of basically anybody who doesn't toe the party line. And you don't know what is happening with real Inez's background. She may not have had a choice, depending on how the politics played out. And there's not really a lot of this in Hercule Poirot's Christmas. Agatha wrote contemporaries, but that does not mean that she spent a lot of time on the politics of the moment. She very rarely did that. But I suspect that an audience reading Hercule Poirot's Christmas in 1938, when it was published, they knew perfectly well what had been happening in Spain, and they could apply their own backstory to why real Inez took up on Simon Lee's offer, and it was because she had no other place to go.
Right. To back up a little bit, Simon Lee's 70th birthday was coming up, and he decided to gather the family together where he was going to spring a surprise on them, which meant he had to have all his children. So that's how he tracked down Inez and invited her.
And he tracked down one of his, he knew about this one of his illegitimate sons, and that is, in the novel, it is Stephen, can't think of his last name at the moment, but it's Stephen in the novel. Here it is Eloi. I cannot...
Right. We'll call him Eloi.
Eloi. We'll call him Eloi. He is a young black man from Ivory Coast. They tell everyone that he is the son of a good friend of Simon Lee's, but he is actually one of Simon Lee's illegitimate children.
His education was supported by Simon. He became a doctor thanks to Simon, and this is where he comes in.
He's Simon's son, and his mother is the sister of the man he claims is his father. So that's where his family name comes from. So he was summoned as well. And the family is a little taken aback, but not too much, except, of course, for Madeline, Antonine's cookie, who is horrified and appalled that a black man dares set foot into the castle. Don't they need doctors in Africa? What on earth is he doing in a civilized country like France? She is the kind of villain you will enjoy hissing and booing at, and she gets her just rewards. She is as beautiful an example as I can see of, she moves from, how did you describe it last night when we were walking around the block?
From high maintenance to crazy town.
Oh, yeah. High maintenance to crazy town.
She's high maintenance because she is glamorous, she is polished to the hilt, she's a singer and an actress, and they are inherently unstable people, having dealt with them in the theater. And at the same time, they can be charismatic and funny and turn on you on a dime.
And that she does all of those things to Antonine because she realizes that he's been having an affair with Louise and she cannot understand why. And to get back at him, she has hot sex.
She just has hot sex.
She just has hot sex with the handyman.
She doesn't have a problem with this.
Louise happens to be pregnant by Antonine. She causes Louise to have a miscarriage by getting Louise to go up on top of a stepladder to readjust a curtain, and then she knocks the stepladder out from underneath Louise.
And she was dizzy because she's having morning sickness. Louise is. It should back up a little bit because when she got pregnant through Antonin, because they came to the castle, Antonin met Louise, kind of fell in love with her again, and fell into bed with her, and, oh, you're the one I want, why did I leave you, all that. And, of course, Madeline finds out about it and is seething, of course.
Yeah, she is seething.
And sees a challenge.
And let me be clear on this. Antonine and Louise have had a long-standing on and off relationship going back 10 years. And you discover at the end of the series that Louise has another child by Antonine. And that's not really clarified whether Antonine knows about will ever meet this younger son, because he's on his way to jail for financial fraud and bad politics.
But he just finds out about it as well during the course of this series.
Yes, and he didn't know that Louise was pregnant, and he was thrilled to pieces because, as he tells her, he never had a child with his first wife. And the reason why Antonine, and this makes you not feel any sympathy towards him, Antonine is a widower. He and wife number one did not have children. He wanted children, but they didn't have any, and he needs, as a politician, to be married. And so he takes up with the blonde cookie instead of marrying the housekeeper whom he loves.
But she's also Jewish.
She is Jewish and a housekeeper, and that just won't do. So she's okay as a mistress, but she's not okay to take out in public legally. And he never mans up and says, I don't care, I love you. He never mans up and says that. It's clear that he loves her, but not enough to face any social discredit for marrying a woman who is a domestic servant and Jewish. And it's really kind of hard to say which of those is going to be worse.
I suspect it would be Jewish, because if you remember the Dreyfus affair, there's a strong anti-Semitic element in France that kind of came out during World War II as well, which is something they don't want to talk about.
Oh, yes, that's right, because there was also that scene. Remember, folks, this takes place in late January, early February of 1939. Antonine, our politician, is interviewed about Hitler, and he talks about how some of the things that he does are, they're sensible things, and Louise is listening and absolutely horrified and appalled. I have kind of mixed feelings about that, because this is France, right next to Belgium. This is 1939, which means it has only been 20 years since the end of World War I, and Antonine has probably, let's see, if Victor is 35, then Antonine is like a year or two older, which means you subtract 20 years from that. He would have grown up around people talking constantly about the savagery of the Germans in World War I. And it's really hard for me to buy that any Frenchman would be able to say anything positive about those degenerate, vicious, horrible, baby-killing monster Germans.
Especially those who are living in the north of France, which is where the main action of World War I took place. This is where the trenches were. This is where the heavy bombardments were. And this particular area would have been behind the German lines as well. So there was a lot of suffering and a lot of damage. But it's also a case where this was about between fascism and communism, and you had a lot of people who really admired Mussolini's form of fascism, and didn't want the communists, or there were those who wanted the communists, and they wanted Germany as a bulwark against Russian expansionism as well. And it's almost like, well, remember there was that story about Winston Churchill where somebody commented that he would support the devil if it supported his policies. And Churchill said, well, I wouldn't go so far as that, but I would put a favorable word for him in Parliament.
Yeah, and this is something to always remember, folks, is that particularly politics of the past, it is far more complicated than what you got in your history class or what you remember from bits in the movies. It is far, far more complicated, and sometimes you make a choice while holding your nose because you know all of your choices are bad, and you hope that you have chosen the one that will be less bad.
And you'd like to think of yourself as being the one who says, oh yes, I'd join the resistance, instead of saying, well, maybe if I just keep my head down and not say anything,
I'll be okay.
I'll be okay as well.
There's a lot in the background about the fallout from the Spanish Civil War with Fake Inez, Real Inez, and Diego the driver, who turns out to be an absolute bastard. And Fake Inez is well shook of him. And then you have Victor, the Harry Lee equivalent. He is, remember, he's the youngest son. He was a runner. He's an athlete. He's a runner. He refused to run in the 1936 Olympics, and he runs in the 400 meter, and part of the...
He didn't want to because it was being held in Berlin, and he didn't want to salute Hitler with the Hitler salute.
Yes, he did not want to salute Hitler, but he could have done what Jesse Owens did, which was just ignore him.
And just ignore him and run and win the race.
But he did what he did, and he's gearing up for the 1940 Olympics. I'm watching this and thinking he's too old to be running this. And he doesn't have the huge entourage, but this was still at a time when athletes were supposed to be gentlemen amateurs and not professionals. The Olympics has kind of gotten away from that, and goodness knows people claim to be amateurs, but they have these enormous support networks behind them, organized and paid for by sneaker companies. But you didn't have that in the 1930s, even in 1939, gearing up for 1940, and then, of course, that Olympics was canceled.
It's also a good time to mention that we have one love triangle going on with Antonin and Louise.
And Magdalene.
Now, Victor is also at the apex of a different triangle.
Oh, yes, with Edward and Edith. Remember, Edward and Victor are much older brother and younger brother. There's probably a good 5, maybe 10 years between them. Victor's the one who ran off in a huff and became an athlete.
And admired by his father as well, because he did stand up to Dad. Whereas he abuses Edouard, who stayed behind,
and
ran
did
the
all
business,
the work.
Did all the work, and was thoroughly subservient and, beaten like a rented mule as a result.
Simon Lee he really is a nasty piece of work. But anyway, so there's Victor. Victor does what he wants, and he does not care what other people think. And so, of course, he is the part of the love triangle with Edward and Edith. That is to say, Victor is the father of his brother's daughter.
Of Alex,
because
and that's
Edith had a torrid affair with Victor when she was 16. They were both 16 years old, and girls can get pregnant at 16, and she did. And she married Edward, who does love her, and he loves their daughter, and he has always known, but he does not talk about it because he's a gentleman. He's not going to. He doesn't want to do anything that would harm Alex. And in fact, he tells Alex or Alix that when she confronts him, when she overhears the conversation between, and this is very soapy, folks. You wouldn't believe how much soap opera is going on.
That's right. Alix was reading a book. Here's somebody coming, kind of hides behind the couch. She was already tucked away by it.
And Victor and Edith have a noisy argument, and she discovers, oh my God, my father is not my father. Mm-hmm. Instead, my mother cheated on my beloved father with a man that my father hates, and Alix is absolutely destroyed. And she has a conversation later on with Edward, and he consoles her, and he tells her that he loved her from the moment he saw her, and he is her father.
Yeah, but of course, 16-year-old girl, high in emotions and high in hormones, and she just isn't buying it. And that's part of the long storyline here, is her reaching an accommodation with the situation.
One of the storylines in this is bad fathers and missing fathers. It is just throughout. Simon Lee is a bad father. He sets his sons against each other. He's most fond of Victor because Victor doesn't take his shit, but also because Victor doesn't care what he does to other people, how he harms other people. And Simon Lee is all about, you are the center of the universe and everyone else is an extra in your world. So Simon is also decent to Eloi, his black son from Ivory Coast. And maybe it's because he didn't raise him, but he treats Eloi better than he treats Antonin or Edouard. And then you get Lampion. We're going back to our investigating detectives. You go back to Lampion, who has no father. His mother was left pregnant and abandoned. And it turns out that Larosiere had a father. He had an adoptive father, and his adoptive father was an abusive, vicious bastard who, you don't know why he married his mother, and there were apparently no other children, which I find hard to believe, but okay. And then it turns out that, here's the big spoiler, folks, Larosiere is one of Simon Lee's sons, one of his many illegitimate sons. There are probably others out there who somehow French TV didn't dredge them up for this. Larosiere is also Simon Lee's illegitimate son, and he hates Simon Lee because of how he treated his mother and how he treats people, and he loathes that man.
Because of that man, he ended up being bullied and abused by his stepfather, and he has vowed revenge. And
he has vowed revenge. This is really interesting because normally in ChristieWorld, people get murdered because their spouse, they don't want this scandal of the divorce, or they want to keep the money, or they want to keep their social status, or they want the money. The money is always a big one. They're trying to hide their bigamy or something like that. This is an unusual motive in ChristieWorld because it is pure, unadulterated hate and revenge. And you don't normally get that. Larosiere, or Superintendent Sugden in the novel, gets nothing for murdering Simon Lee. He doesn't get any money. He doesn't inherit a chateau. He doesn't inherit a title. He doesn't get to keep his social status and get the girl that he wants. He doesn't get anything.
As a matter of fact, at least as far as this adaptation is concerned, Larosiere was in for a share of Simon's fortune. Simon was actually looking for him. He was the mysterious X on the list of children, legitimate and illegitimate, that he was looking for and couldn't find.
So he would have actually gotten some money if he hadn't done anything, if he hadn't killed the old man. And he didn't know that. Even if he had known that, I don't think he would have cared. He wanted to kill the old man. He hated Simon Lee. And they actually have a conversation. This is after the big climax when Lampion does the Poirot in the drawing room of the chateau. And Larosiere is bundled off to wait in a small locked pantry. And he has a conversation with Simon Lee's ghost about, I was always looking for the son who hated me the most, and now I found him. I found you, the son who hates me the most.
But very nicely done, I thought.
It was really nicely done. You get the impression of a little bit of craziness. In a way, you could say that Larosiere does get away with it. They give you
at the end of the movie, they give you a title card afterwards, or
an epilogue, a short written epilogue, which is that he is in jail, and of course the war comes, which throws everything off. He's in jail, accused. Everyone knows he did it. He admits that he did it, but the wheels of justice have been kind of put off because of the greater problem of World War II.
Right. So in September 1st of that year, so we're only talking March, April, May, June, July, August, September. 7 months later, war breaks out, and so he's in a jail waiting until the end of the war to be guillotined. And there's a prisoner exchange. There's some kind of a prisoner movement. An exchange in like 1942. They were moving them elsewhere,
probably for their own safety from invading Germans. And he escapes to Egypt, which is where he wanted to go all along, and stays in Egypt until age 70. And I guess Egypt doesn't have an extradition policy with the French government. But
I guess it's a happy ending.
It is a happy ending.
It's a happy ending for him, and we can appreciate that because, well, Simon really deserved it.
He really deserved it. He really deserved it. He is one of those... Christie doesn't often do evilly villains, but Simon Lee is someone who needed killing.
He killed Simon, but he also killed Madame Dupree.
Yes, and he set up Fake Inez to take the fall.
Yeah.
He is not blameless in his murder at all, because if Larosiere had set up the murder in such a way that no one else got blamed and, the murder is unsolved, then it would become praiseworthy, like Ambrose Bierce. Ambrose Bierce gives you 4 definitions of murder, and one of them is, you're sad that it happened, and then there's, I can't remember, but the last two, the last one is praiseworthy. And this does not fall into the praiseworthy category because he sets an innocent victim up, and that is Fake Inez, who is under enormous pressure herself. And in fact, that was one of the things I did not like about this episode at the very end. I'm watching, 6 hours and 20 minutes, and I get a huge amount of Fake Inez's story, and she comes to the realization that Diego, whom she thought she loved, is going to be an abusive, vicious piece of work, and he's fine with her as long as she toes the line and thinks exactly the way he tells her to, but the minute she has an independent thought of her own, right across the throat, he'll beat her black and blue. She is trapped. She's already lied to the family. She doesn't know what to do, and then she meets Eloi. He's intelligent. He sees her as a decent person, and she falls madly in love with him. And you get a finishing story for every single character, including the minor ones. But you don't get anything for Fake Inez and Eloi. The best you get is in the funeral scene. Everybody's in black under their umbrellas because, of course, it is raining, because when does it not rain in a funeral in a movie? And all you see is them in the background sharing an umbrella. So you have to assume that they managed to get their happy ever after, but you don't even see her getting out of jail.
Yeah, because she is framed for the murder, and the last we saw of her, she was in the jail. She had caged Eloi to smuggle a razor blade that she was planning to take someone hostage and escape, but
cut her own throat.
Cut her own throat. You didn't quite know.
Because she was afraid of justice. She knew, as being a Spanish citizen, there is no justice. If you can't afford to buy justice, there is no justice.
And she didn't trust the family, who said, "We'll get you a lawyer. We'll help you as much as we can." And she didn't trust that. And she was about to launch an escape, and the jailer looked at her and said, "Oh, you have the eyes of my daughter."
And he tells her, underneath the bread, I hid 2 cookies for you.
Baked by my wife.
Baked by my wife.
Yeah. And my daughter, my daughter who I don't have anymore. And she actually felt a spirit of humanity and decided not to slash his throat, I guess, which is a good thing.
And that's the last you see of her until you see her under the umbrella with Eloi in black in the rain, and you don't have any idea. You don't even get a single sentence that says, "We better get Inez out of jail."
Yeah.
Nothing. You get no completion story for them, but you get easily 5 minutes of Alix riding her horse up and down the beach. Well, it's a beautiful horse, and I'm sure the actress really had a good time riding the horse, but that's not what I wanted to see.
But this is something, and this is, I think, about the only fault we could find with the series. For something that is so long, there is plenty of incident, there's plenty of drama.
There's always something going on.
There are character arcs within character arcs.
And you have enough time to learn who everyone is, to recognize them. They did a good enough casting job that I could tell everyone apart. And what I thought was especially interesting was, if you look carefully, Edouard, Antonine, Victor, and Superintendent Larosiere all have a similar facial cast. They all have a thicker jaw, and Larosiere has the very nice beard. But when you look at Edouard, Victor, and Antonine, they all have a 5 o'clock shadow by 2 o'clock. And I don't know if that's makeup or not, but the actors, they look like they could actually be related to each other. They could be brothers and half-brothers. Eloi is the one who looks least like anyone else in the family. And it isn't because of his darker skin. It's because his face he has a more rounded face, but we'll say that he takes after his mother.
Mm-hmm.
But they did a beautiful job of casting. I could tell everybody apart, even the maids in the background, whether they are the housemaids or the kitchen maids, I could tell them apart. And you got all of this story, and my God, they could have spent another half hour, because what was the relationship between the prostitute in the city with Edouard and Edward's father? And
well, it's also, the script took care to portray Edward as the eldest son, as clearly Simon's spawn. Because when he's in charge and he starts treating the other characters, and you start seeing he's treating them like Simon treated them. He was this kind of milquetoast character throughout most of it, and then he got power, and you can see his father in him. I thought that was a very nice touch.
And he was a complicated man, too.
Yeah.
You get the feeling that all of them are fully rounded people. They're real people. And you do get a lovely love story with Louise seeing Mr. Paul, the butler. They very gently fall in love, and she sees him as a much better man than Antonine, her lover of 10 years, who is always going to disappoint her.
Mm-hmm.
And she is finally able to let go of any dreams she might have had about Antonine,
Mm-hmm.
that he will never be there for her when the chips are down. It's just not how he's wired.
And she can reconcile with her son as well, who
Yes,
she gave into somebody else's hands at a nearby chateau, a woman who specializes in raising orphans or unwanted children.
Raising the children of women who could not raise them themselves.
Yeah.
So you see that. You see the reconciliation of Mr. Paul and his son Richard, who becomes a runner. He becomes an athlete like Victor. Victor becomes a trainer because he's gotten too old and he has injuries. But he can train Richard. And as Mr. Paul says, you've always been running. Well, now you have something to run to instead of run from.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of personal growth here, a lot of character development, and
And there's some humor as well.
Oh, a lot. Sometimes it was very funny.
Well, you mentioned the politics, and there's one that was especially for French audiences because as part of the dinner discussion, they start talking about de Gaulle. And the consensus is, oh, he'll fade. We will never hear from him again in a few years. And, he's the one who becomes president of France in the 60s.
And we know who he is today. They named the airport after him.
There's grimness and there's humor. And there's also, we haven't even touched on Lampion's story because he comes in as a very callow inspector, a very callow, untrained detective, and he learns throughout and grows to the point where he gives the Poirot summation at the end of the movie.
And you can see how clever he is. He is unsure of himself, but he thinks. And when he says something important, this is where watching it a second time will really pay off. When he says something important to Larosiere, oh, the reason why the body was pulled close to the fire was maybe it was to make us get the time of the murder wrong, and Larosiere poo-poos that idea. He finds the string around the banister where the statue fell on Alix. And again, Larosiere immediately discounts it, but Lampion keeps at it like a good detective would, trying to figure this out. And at the end, he is rewarded because Larosiere tells him, I'm proud of you. You'll be a good policeman, a good detective.
And you can look at his reaction and realize that's a mixed blessing coming from a murderer like you and a thoroughly despicable person. For whatever reason you have, you're still a murderer.
You're still a murderer. There's just so much to like about it, but do understand, when you watch this, as well as watch season 1 to see more of Larosiere and Lampion, they're in parallel universes. There's no connection between the two of them other than the detectives and the setting. Even the time is different by a couple of years, so there's no connection, which is why in the season 1 of The Little Murders, Larosiere is not a murderer.
Just keep that in mind. But as Agatha Christie likes to point out, anybody could be a murderer given the right incentive.
Absolutely.
Well, we have almost hit an hour.
So I think that's enough.
I think that's enough. Believe me, there are things we still haven't talked about that we could. But
what I will say is, if you were a fan of Agatha Christie, this is really worth watching. And make sure you set aside enough time. And it is a soap opera. It is a French soap opera, and there is nudity, and there is sex, and there's even a little bit of gay sex. And you realize that Richard can go either way. And
that was a funny scene as well,
that was funny, too.
And
that was funny, too. He says he would have sex with a table if only it would hold still long enough. Like Captain Jack in Torchwood.
Yeah. Yep. Captain Jack Harkness.
Yes, that's the one. Jack Harkness in Doctor Who.
Yeah.
But it was fun, and I highly recommend it.
If you like, come visit PeschelPress.com to look at our line of Agatha Christie annotated novels, and we'll see you next time at the movies.
Thanks for joining us.
Agatha Christie, She Watched, is Teresa Peschel and Bill Peschel, produced by Bill Peschel. New episodes come out every week wherever you stream your content. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can help support us by going to anchor.fm/mystery and leaving a 5-star rating and review, and by helping to spread the word. To advertise on Mystery She Watched, email Peschel at peschelpress.com. All questions and comments can be emailed to Peschel at peschelpress.com. And thank you for listening.